The first part ended with Emily walking away, heartbroken after Ryan's cruel embarrassment. Now, the second part begins with an empty house and a man full of regret, realizing too late that he pushed away the one person who truly mattered. What follows is a journey of change, redemption, and a love that fights its way back from pride, pain, and class divides. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful, but the kind that feels like something is missing. Emily was gone. Ryan sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His head still hurt from the drinks, but what hurt more was something inside his chest. It was a strange kind of pain, like he had lost something important, something he didn't know he cared about so deeply, until it was too late. He called for his head of staff. Any idea where she might have gone? Did she talk to anyone? She packed up last night, the woman said softly. She didn't leave a note. She just left. Ryan didn't say anything. He just nodded, stood up, and walked out of his room. The mansion, once full of noise and music, felt like a big empty shell. The chandeliers still sparkled. The marble floors still shined. The expensive paintings still hung on the walls. But none of it felt beautiful anymore. Not without her soft footsteps. Not without her voice. Not without the way she made the house feel warm. He walked through the hallways, past the dining room where Emily once placed a plate in front of him with care, past the library where she once sat across from him, her eyes glowing with wisdom, past the garden window where she once paused to look at the flowers, smiling softly. She had been everywhere, and now she was nowhere. At first, Ryan tried to return to his old life. The loud parties, the fancy meals, the girls with pretty faces and sharp words. But none of it felt the same. The jokes weren't funny. The laughter felt forced. Even the music annoyed him. He found himself eating alone, sitting in the library without a word, standing at the windows, staring at the road, wondering where she had gone. The staff noticed something was different. One day, Ryan walked into the kitchen. A young maid dropped a glass by accident. It shattered. The room froze. Everyone waited for him to yell. That's what he used to do. But this time he simply said, "Are you okay?" The girl nodded quickly, shocked. "Be careful," Ryan said, picking up a broom himself. "It's not safe." The cook looked at him like he had grown another head. Later that week, he passed by the gardener and asked, "Do you need anything? Tools? New gloves?" The gardener stared, confused. "No, sir. Thank you." Ryan even sat with his head of staff during lunch, something he had never done before. He listened as she talked about her family. He asked questions. He didn't rush off. Word spread through the mansion like fire. "Something's happened to Mr. Cole. He's changed." He even said sorry. But the truth was, Ryan hadn't fully changed. Not yet. He was still the same man. Still rich. Still proud. But now he was thinking. Now he was feeling. And it scared him. One night, he walked into the library again. The same chair where Emily used to sit was empty. He sat across from it and closed his eyes. He remembered her words. "Poverty isn't always a choice. Kindness is not weakness. Why do you treat people like they don't matter?" At the time, he had brushed them off. But now they echoed louder than any music he had ever played. He picked up a book she once read. A simple book about courage and love. He flipped through the pages. A small, dried flower fell out. She must have placed it there. He held it gently as if it would break. That night, he didn't sleep. He walked through the mansion, barefoot, listening to the silence. No laughter. No footsteps. No Emily. His heart, once full of pride, now felt soft and heavy. He stood by the main door, where she had walked out for the last time. No goodbye. No note. No second chance. "I messed up," he whispered to no one. But the walls heard, and so did his heart. Because for the first time in his life, Ryan Cole understood something real. It wasn't the money, or the house, or the power. It was her. And she was gone. Emily walked through the empty streets as dawn slowly lit the sky, her thin slippers soaked with early morning dew. Her heart felt heavier than her small bag. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Her mind kept replaying that night. His voice laughing with the others, his eyes watching as they mocked her, and his silence that said everything. Why? Why would he do that to her? Just a few nights ago he had taken her to dinner. A beautiful, quiet place where she had worn the blue dress he bought. He had looked at her like she mattered, spoke to her like she was more than a servant, like she was a woman he was beginning to respect, maybe even care about. Stupid, foolish, silly girl. How could she think, even for 1 second, that a man like Ryan Cole would truly care about her? She was nothing. A poor orphan with no education, no fine clothes, no proper manners. She didn't even know how to hold a fork properly at the restaurant. She had never been to school beyond the basics. She had no family except her sick little brother, Daniel. What was I thinking? She wiped her eyes and kept walking. The streets were still asleep. She needed to disappear. That mansion, that life, it was never hers. It was a dream. A brief, soft dream in a life that had only ever shown her coldness and hardship. The pain wasn't just from what Ryan had done. It was also from what she had started to feel. She had started to believe he could change. That he was changing. She had seen the way he looked at her when she spoke about dignity, about poverty, about Daniel. He had bought her that dress. He had looked at her differently. Like maybe, just maybe, he saw her. But he didn't. He never did. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Ryan wasn't himself. He hadn't slept either. The laughter from the party echoed in his head. But it wasn't funny anymore. It was cruel, ugly, and he had joined in. He had let his friends mock her. He had mocked her too. All because they joked that he was catching feelings for a maid. And he, too proud to admit the truth, laughed along to prove them wrong. But now she was gone. And with her, something inside him had gone silent. For the first time in his life, Ryan left his mansion without his driver, without his guards. He dressed down, no suits or flashy watches. He needed to find her. He didn't know where to start, but he had to try. He searched through every place he thought she might go. First, he visited hospitals. Emily had once talked about Daniel and his medical condition. Ryan thought maybe she took him to get help, but there was no trace. Next, he went to orphanages. He remembered how she once mentioned being raised in one before she was left to fend for herself. He visited 3 different ones in the city. None had seen her, but in one, he saw a little girl who reminded him of Emily. Bright, quiet, with deep eyes. She smiled at him. He smiled back softly. He went to shelters, soup kitchens, and crowded street markets. He asked people, described her, showed them a photo captured from the mansion's hallway camera. A few people thought she looked familiar, but none knew where she was. Day after day, Ryan kept looking. The city was large, and she was just one girl. But he couldn't stop. Something had shifted in him. Something irreversible. He remembered her words again. Poverty isn't always a choice. The way you treat people shows what's inside your soul. Back then, he had laughed. Now he understood. He sat on a bench one night, staring up at the dark sky, and whispered to himself, "She gave me something I didn't know I needed. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was grace. She had saved his life when she had no reason to. She had spoken truth to him when everyone else only told him what he wanted to hear. She saw past his wealth and looked right at the boy he used to be, before arrogance swallowed him whole. And he had crushed her. Now he wasn't just searching for Emily. He was searching for forgiveness, for healing, for something real. He was searching for grace, and he prayed he hadn't lost it forever. The mansion hadn't been the same since Emily left. The lights still shone just as bright, the meals were still served on gold-rimmed plates, and the marble floors still sparkled. but something felt hollow. Like the house itself had lost its heartbeat. The servants noticed first. "Have you seen Mr. Ryan lately?" Angela, the head housekeeper, whispered to the chef one morning. "He's not been yelling. Not once this week." "He thanked me for breakfast yesterday," the chef replied, wide-eyed. "Even asked if my son's leg was healing well." The two shared a look. Ryan Cole, the same man who once threw a plate across the kitchen because his eggs were too soft? The man who used to blast music at 2 a.m. while partying with women who never saw them as more than moving chairs? That Ryan? Something had changed him, and they all knew what, or rather, who. Emily. Her name now lived in low voices in every hallway. The quiet girl with calm eyes and a kind smile. The girl who once helped the gardener fix his torn sandal. The girl who never raised her voice, even when insulted by the rich guests. The girl who somehow, without trying, softened the hardest heart in the house. "I think he misses her," said the laundry maid one evening, folding Ryan's now untouched suits. "He hasn't gone out partying. He barely eats. Just sits in his study and stares at the fire. He raised our salaries last week," Angela added. "Told me I could have weekends off to visit my grandchildren. I didn't even ask." "But what if he goes back to who he was?" the young driver asked quietly. "What if the sadness takes over and he runs back to those arrogant friends? I've seen it happen to men like him. They fall, and they fall harder." There was a pause. Then Angela, strong and motherly, stood up and straightened her apron. "Then we have to find her," she said firmly. "Find who?" asked the butler. "Emily. We find her. We owe her that much. If anyone can keep Mr. Ryan from becoming what he used to be, it's her." "But we don't even know where she went," said the chef. "Then we start asking. The market, the shelter, the hospitals. She couldn't have gone too far." They all nodded. For the first time, they weren't just servants serving a master. They were people protecting someone who had changed them too. Because when Ryan became softer, the whole house breathed easier. He saw them, heard them. He began to listen when they spoke, remembered birthdays, smiled when he passed by. Even the walls didn't feel so heavy anymore. But now he walked like a ghost. Sad eyes, quiet voice. No women, no laughter, no cruel commands. The Emily effect had worn off, and they were scared of who he might become without her. "She gave him something no one else ever could," Angela said, her voice gentle. "Not just love, humanity." So they made a pact. If anyone saw Emily anywhere, they would tell the others. They would bring her back, gently, kindly, and explain everything. Not as servants obeying an order, but as people who knew what love, even unspoken, looked like. And if they couldn't find her, they would keep trying. Because sometimes, the heart of a house isn't in its walls or windows, but in the people who pass through it, leaving behind the kind of light that no chandelier can replace. Ryan was changing, and everyone around him noticed. His friends were the first to speak up. They missed him. The Ryan they knew used to walk into parties with loud laughter, flashy suits, and a trail of admirers. Now he barely answered their calls. He didn't show up at clubs anymore. Group chats went unread. He was buried in work, arriving early and staying late at the office. "What's going on with him?" one of them asked over drinks. "Maybe company stress?" another guessed. But his company was thriving. In fact, it was doing better than ever. His mother saw the change too whenever he came visiting. Ryan, her only son, had grown quiet. He didn't snap at staff or complain when things weren't perfect. He spent more time sitting alone, thoughtful, distant, different. One quiet evening, they sat together on the patio, sipping tea. She watched him closely, her heart full of questions. "You've changed, Ryan," she said gently. He didn't argue. He just looked down at his cup. "Is it a girl?" she asked, tilting her head. He was quiet for a long time before he finally whispered, "Yes." His mother reached for his hand. If she touched your heart this deeply, then she must be special. Ryan nodded slowly. I ruined it, Mum. I let her walk away, and now I can't stop thinking about her. Then, one sunny afternoon, everything changed. One of his staff, Joseph, had stepped out for lunch and wandered into a small local restaurant near the old market. He ordered his food casually, then froze mid-sentence. Behind the counter, serving customers with quiet grace, was Emily. She looked tired, a little thinner, but still radiant in her simple way, her hair tied back, her apron clean, her smile soft. Even in the bustle, there was peace in her eyes. Joseph didn't wait. He dropped his food and ran straight back to the mansion. Sir, sir, he gasped, bursting into Ryan's office. I saw her, Emily. She's working at a little food joint near the old market. Ryan's heart stopped. He stood still for a beat, then grabbed his car keys without a word. The restaurant was crowded and noisy when Ryan arrived. The scent of pepper soup and fried plantain filled the air. He pushed through the door, his eyes searching. And then he saw her, carrying plates to a table, laughing softly with a child. His chest tightened. She hadn't seen him yet. For a moment he just watched. Then he stepped forward. Emily turned and froze. Their eyes locked. The noise of the restaurant faded away. Time stood still. Ryan walked right up to her. Without caring who was watching, he slowly got down on one knee. Gasps filled the room. Phones came out. Everyone watched. Emily, he said, his voice raw. I'm sorry. She blinked. Ryan, what are you doing? I came here to make things right. That night at the party, I was weak. I let my friends pressure me into proving I hadn't changed. But I had. You changed me. And I didn't know how to handle that. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Her hands trembled. You embarrassed me, Ryan, in front of everyone. I know, and I regret it every day. You gave me kindness, and I repaid you with cruelty. But I was afraid of how deeply I was beginning to care for you. Emily looked away, her voice low. We're from different worlds. I'm just a girl with no family, no real education. You're a billionaire. Ryan reached for her hand. That doesn't matter. You're the most grounded, kind, and wise person I've ever met. You saved me, not just from that accident, but from myself. Her tears spilled over. I love you, Emily, he said, his voice steady. And I don't care who knows it. I don't want anyone else. Just you. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Emily stared at him, her heart pounding. Then, slowly, she knelt beside him. You really mean that? She whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening. With all my heart. People around them burst into applause. Some cheered. Others cried. By the next morning, the world couldn't stop talking. News headlines read, Love in plain clothes. Billionaire tech CEO kneels for former servant. Ryan Cole's secret romance revealed. Social media exploded with videos and photos. Some praised him. Others doubted it. But Ryan didn't care. All he saw was Emily. And this time, he wasn't going to let her go. The next morning, Ryan's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, messages, missed video chats. Group chats lit up like fireworks. His friends were in shock. Bro, is it true? One asked over voice note. You went to a local buka to kneel? Another scoffed. For her? That orphan girl? Someone else whispered. Ryan, are you okay? He didn't answer any of them. Even his mother called. Her voice was calm, but there was something cautious beneath it. Ryan, she said, I saw the videos online. I just want to know. Are you sure? About this girl. He looked at the woman who had raised him, who always wanted the best for him. He nodded. She makes me feel human, Mom. I've never felt that before. His mother sighed. Then I'll support you. Just guide your heart. Don't let emotions blind you. Business associates were less kind. A few texted politely, Others weren't subtle at all. Hope everything is all right, Ryan. This doesn't look good for your image. Some of us are concerned. Are you still in the right headspace? If this relationship continues, investors may start asking questions. Ryan read their messages in silence, then turned off his phone. He didn't care. He had never felt more at peace. That same morning, far away in a dusty, forgotten corner of the city, Emily's old phone rang. It was a number she hadn't seen in years. "Emily?" a voice said. She froze. It was her uncle, the same man who had vanished from her life when she and her brother needed him most. "You know," he said smoothly, "I always knew you were special. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," she replied politely, "but I have to call you back. I'm a little busy right now." She ended the call, heart steady. She owed him nothing. Ryan didn't make a scene that day. No cameras. No staff waiting by the gate. He simply drove Emily and Daniel home, his home. The mansion gates opened slowly, revealing the long driveway lined with trimmed flowers and marble lions. Emily held Daniel's hand tightly, her other hand gripping the seat. Her heart thudded in disbelief. It wasn't just the size of the house. It was the warmth waiting for her. As they stepped out of the car, the entire staff stood in two neat lines by the entrance. Not as superiors, not as judges. They were smiling. Genuinely. "Welcome back, Miss Emily," one of the cooks said with a small bow. "Welcome, Daniel," added the gardener, grinning as he handed the boy a chocolate bar. Emily looked around in disbelief. The last time she walked into this house, she carried dirty laundry and kept her eyes on the floor. Now they were welcoming her as someone important. She looked at Ryan. He didn't say a word. He just reached out and gently took her hand. As they walked together into the grand hallway, Emily's eyes filled with tears. She tried to stop them, but they came anyway. Soft sobs that shook her shoulders. Ryan paused and wiped her cheeks. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she said quietly. Ryan leaned in. "Then I promise to make the dream last forever." She looked at him, this powerful, handsome man with the world at his feet, and still couldn't understand how she ended up here. She wasn't returning as a maid. She was returning as the woman he chose, the one he loved, a girl from the streets, now standing at the center of a mansion, loved by the richest man in the country. It didn't feel real, but the warmth in his hand was real. The weight of Daniel's sleepy head against her shoulder was real, and the peace in her heart was the realest thing she had ever known. Emily stood quietly by the window of the mansion's east wing, watching the morning sun fall across the garden. Birds chirped, and a soft breeze moved the curtains. Behind her, the house was quiet, but not the kind of cold silence she once feared. This was peace. She turned when she heard footsteps. Ryan walked in, barefoot, holding 2 cups of tea. "For you," he said, handing her one. She smiled, still not used to moments like this. "Thank you." Ryan sat beside her on the couch, resting his arm around her shoulders. "You've been quiet all morning. I'm just still getting used to this," she whispered. "All of it. You, this house, the kindness." Ryan looked at her. "You deserve all of it. And more." She smiled again, her eyes soft. There was something different about him now. Not just his words, but his spirit. He had changed. Everyone could see it. He treated the servants with kindness now, thanking them, even remembering their names. He asked about their families, their health, their dreams. Emily noticed how they now looked at him with genuine respect. Not fear. It made him more handsome somehow, more human. He no longer stayed out late with his old friends. No more wild parties or aimless living. He poured himself into his company and into Emily. He took Daniel to the hospital for regular checkups, spoke to doctors personally, even played video games with him in the evenings. He was trying, and it showed. One evening, as they sat outside watching Daniel chase butterflies across the lawn, Ryan turned to her. "I don't care what anyone thinks," he said. "Not my friends. Not the world. You're the one I want." Emily looked away shyly. "I'm serious," he continued. "I want you to be my wife." Her breath caught. "Ryan." He held her hand. "I know you might not feel like you belong in my world, but my world was broken before you. I was rich but lost. You brought me back to life, Emily." Tears welled in her eyes. She had dreamed of love, but never like this. Never from someone like him. He stood up. "This evening, I will show you something." Later that night, Ryan invited his old friends over. They hadn't seen him in weeks. When they walked in, expecting loud music and fancy wine, they found him standing beside Emily, holding her hand. "Guys," he said simply, "meet the woman I love." There was an awkward silence. Some cleared their throats. One tried to smile. Another glanced down, ashamed. They remembered how they had spoken about her. Mocked her, whispered things, laughed. Now here she was, not just standing in his mansion, but standing beside him. She had won. "We were wrong," one of them finally said, stepping forward. "And we're sorry." Emily nodded politely, still unsure how to respond. That night, after they left, Ryan turned to her. "I told you, you shine too bright for anyone to ignore." Emily laughed softly. "I don't feel like I shine, but you do. To me." The weeks flew by. One morning, as Emily sat on the bed brushing her hair, Ryan knelt beside her. "I have a few promises to make," he said. She blinked, surprised. "I promise you'll go back to school and finish your education. I'll make sure Daniel gets the best doctor's money can find. I promise you'll never work as a maid again, because this house is yours now. You are its madam." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And one more thing," he said, standing up and walking to his desk. He returned holding a white envelope. "What's this?" she asked. He handed it to her. Inside was a legal document. The Emily Hope Foundation. "It's real," he said. "A charity to support orphaned girls. In your name, to honor the girl who saved my life and my soul." She covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. They didn't want a grand wedding. No press, no designer gowns. Just love. A few weeks later, they stood in a quiet garden under the shade of a jacaranda tree. Ryan wore a simple cream suit. Emily wore a soft lilac dress with her natural hair tied back. Daniel stood between them, holding both their hands. Ryan's mother was there, beaming. She had watched her son grow from an arrogant boy into a man she could be proud of. "She's beautiful," she whispered to her son, "and well-mannered. You've chosen well." Ryan squeezed Emily's hand. "I didn't choose her," he replied. "She was always meant to be mine. I just had to grow up first." As the vows were spoken, and the sun filtered through the trees, Emily felt like she was floating. She wasn't a servant anymore. She wasn't that scared girl standing in the rain with her little brother. She was a wife, a mother, a woman loved, deeply, truly. And as Ryan kissed her, gentle and full of promise, she closed her eyes and let it sink in. This wasn't a dream. This was her new life. Grace had found her and restored everything she once thought she lost. And so, the arrogant billionaire who once saw the poor as beneath him learned the greatest lesson of all, that love, kindness, and true worth cannot be measured by wealth. The orphan girl, who had nothing but heart, changed not just his life, but his soul. Their story reminds us that sometimes, the people we least expect can teach us everything we need to know. Stay tuned for our next story, one even more powerful, surprising, and unforgettable. You won't want to miss it.